March 17, 1943. North Atlantic, 400 miles south of Iceland. Convoy HX-229 plows through 15-foot swells. 41 merchant ships, laden with 140,000 tons of cargo bound for Britain. Steel hulls groan against the cold Atlantic. Salt spray freezes on railings before it can run off. The sky is the color of wet concrete, low, heavy, pressing down on the ocean like a lid on a pot. The water is the color of slate. The temperature is 38 degrees Fahrenheit. A man overboard would last perhaps 7 minutes before hypothermia stopped his heart. The convoy knows this. Every man aboard every ship carries that knowledge like a stone in his pocket. In the galley of the SS William Eustace, 28-year-old ship's cook Thomas Lawson washes dishes as the Liberty ship rolls violently. The water in his sink sloshes left, then right. Tin plates clatter. Steam rises from the dishwater, the only warmth in a universe of cold. His hands are red and raw from the hot water, but he keeps them submerged anyway. The alternative, cold air, cold steel, cold everything, is worse. Around him the ship creaks and groans. Not the metallic screech of something breaking, but the organic sound of a vessel under stress. Wood paneling flexing. Rivets holding. Steel plates bending slightly then straightening. A Liberty ship makes these sounds constantly. After 3 months aboard, Lawson knows which sounds are normal and which ones mean trouble. This is normal. Just the Atlantic doing what it always does. Testing everything. Breaking what it can. Above him on the bridge, Captain James Bannerman scans the horizon with binoculars, knowing what's coming. His hands are steady but his jaw is tight. The U-boats are out there. Always out there. Listening. Beneath the waves, 600 yards off the convoy's port beam, Captain Lieutenant Helmut Manzek sits in the control room of U-758. His hydrophone operator, a boy of 19 with acne scars and steady hands, presses headphones to his ears. The young German sailor whispers, "Contact bearing 280. Multiple screws. Heavy machinery noise. Estimate 40 vessels." Manzek smiles. He doesn't need to say anything. His crew knows the drill. The wolf pack has found its prey. What none of them know, not Captain Bannerman, not Captain Lieutenant Manzek, not the 19-year-old hydrophone operator whose hands will never stop shaking after this war ends, is that Tommy Lawson, the cook, has noticed something strange about the way Liberty ships sound underwater. Something no naval engineer, no acoustic scientist, no admiral has considered. Something that will change the entire Battle of the Atlantic. Over the next 6 days, 22 merchant ships from Convoys HX-229 and SC-122 will sink beneath the North Atlantic, taking 300 merchant seamen to the bottom. It will be the worst convoy disaster since 1942. Admiral Karl Donitz, commander of Germany's U-boat fleet, will call it the greatest convoy battle of all time. The numbers tell a devastating story. In March 1943, U-boats sink 567,000 tons of Allied shipping, more than in any previous month of the war. At current loss rates, Britain has just 3 months of food supplies remaining. 3 months before starvation becomes a strategic certainty. Prime Minister Winston Churchill will later write, "The only thing that really frightened me during the war was the U-boat peril. The technology behind that peril is brutally simple and brutally effective." German hydrophone systems, perfected over 3 years of underwater warfare, can detect convoy propeller noise from 80 nautical miles away. That's the distance from London to the English Channel. A convoy leaving Liverpool can be tracked before it clears Irish waters. Individual merchant ships betray their position from up to 12 miles distant. Each vessel has its own acoustic signature. Twin-screw Liberty ships sound different from single-screw freighters. Tankers loaded with petroleum resonate differently than cargo ships hauling steel. Experienced hydrophone operators can identify not just the presence of ships, but their type, their speed, even their cargo weight based purely on the sounds traveling through water. The sound signature is complex, layered. Cavitating propellers create the loudest component. Bubbles forming and collapsing on blade surfaces generate a distinctive crackling, like fire in slow motion. Engine vibrations transmit through the hull into the water as low-frequency hums. Steam turbines create high-pitched whines. Pumps, generators, reduction gears, every piece of machinery aboard a merchant ship broadcasts its presence into the Atlantic. Sound travels differently in water than in air. Faster. Farther. Less degradation. At certain depths, temperature and salinity gradients create sound channels, layers where acoustic energy refracts and focuses, allowing signals to propagate for hundreds of miles. German hydrophone operators have learned to exploit these channels, positioning their boats at depths where they can hear convoys long before the convoys know they're being hunted. Allied escort vessels try everything. Zigzag patterns to complicate targeting solutions. Radio silence to prevent direction finding. Astic sweeps, active sonar pinging into the darkness, searching for submerged submarines. None of it works. The convoys are too loud. The ocean carries sound too well. And U-boats hunting in wolf packs simply sit silent at 400 feet, listening with hydrophones, waiting for the perfect firing position. They don't need to see the convoys. They can hear them coming from beyond the horizon. What the Allies don't know is that the solution will come not from a naval engineer or an acoustic scientist, but from a merchant ship cook who dropped out of school at 14. Naval Headquarters, Liverpool, England. March 1943. The Western Approaches Command has been fighting U-boats for 3.5 years. They've tried everything. In 1941, the Royal Navy installed Acoustic sonar on every escort vessel. The active sonar could theoretically detect submerged submarines up to 2 miles away. In practice, U-boats simply attacked on the surface at night where Acoustic was useless. The escorts heard nothing until torpedoes were already in the water. In 1942, Allied forces introduced centimetric radar, capable of detecting surfaced U-boats in darkness. Dönitz responded by ordering his boats to attack submerged, guided purely by hydrophone. The advantage returned to Germany. By early 1943, Allied convoy escort doctrine requires ships to travel in tight formation, 9 columns, spacing of 600 yards, to maximize air cover and escort protection. But the tight formation creates a massive acoustic signature. 60 merchant ships traveling together sound like a city moving through the ocean. The British Admiralty knows this. They've commissioned study after study. In February 1943, Dr. Reginald Foster, director of the Admiralty's Naval Operational Research Division, publishes a classified paper. Merchant vessel propeller cavitation and machinery resonance create underwater sound profiles detectable at extreme range. Without fundamental hull redesign, impossible during wartime production, convoys will continue to announce their positions to enemy hydrophones. The expert consensus is clear. You cannot make a merchant ship quiet enough to evade hydrophone detection. Dr. Harold Burns, the Admiralty's chief naval architect, explains the physics in a memo dated February 14, 1943. A Liberty ship's propeller rotates at 76 RPM under load, displacing 250 tons of water through a 15-foot diameter. The resulting cavitation, bubbles forming and collapsing on blade surfaces, generates broadband acoustic energy across frequencies from 100 to 10,000 Hz. German hydrophones are optimized for precisely this range. Reducing propeller noise would require complete propulsion system redesign, 6 months of drydock time per vessel, and manufacturing capabilities we simply don't possess. The stakes couldn't be higher. Britain imports 2/3 of its food and 100% of its petroleum by sea. In March 1943, German U-boats are sinking ships faster than Allied shipyards can build them. Gross tonnage lost exceeds gross tonnage launched for 3 consecutive months. At the Atlantic Convoy Conference held in London on March 4, 1943, Rear Admiral Leonard Murray, commander of the Royal Canadian Navy's Atlantic Forces, delivers a blunt assessment to a room full of officers who already know they're losing. Gentlemen, we're losing. Our escorts can't hear the U-boats because of our own convoy noise. The enemy can hear us from 50 miles away. Unless we solve the acoustic detection problem, we'll lose the Atlantic by summer. A British naval engineer proposes installing sound dampening mounts on every piece of machinery aboard every merchant ship. Estimated cost, $250,000 per vessel with 12 weeks in drydock. With 2,400 merchant ships in the Atlantic convoy system, it would take 138 years to retrofit the entire fleet. An American scientist suggests coating ship hulls with rubber to absorb sound. The idea is tested and rejected within days. The rubber degrades in salt water within weeks, creates massive drag and reduces ship speed by 3 knots, making convoys even more vulnerable. A Canadian engineer proposes redesigning propellers with swept-back blades to reduce cavitation. Excellent idea. Completely unfeasible. It would require retooling every propeller foundry in North America and scrapping 14,000 existing propellers. By March 15, 1943, Allied naval commanders accept the grim reality. There is no technological solution to convoy acoustic signatures. Merchant ships will continue to announce their positions to every U-boat within hearing range. The only strategy is to add more escorts, more air cover, and hope that enough ships survive to keep Britain in the war. No one at the Atlantic Convoy Conference mentions Thomas Lawson. No one knows who he is. Thomas Lawson was born in Bradford, England in 1915. His father owned a small restaurant on Westgate. Nothing fancy, just good food for working people who couldn't afford fancy. Tommy left school at 14 not because he was stupid, but because his family needed the money. He worked in his father's kitchen, learning to cook for crowds, learning that feeding people is honest work even if it doesn't pay well. He joined the Merchant Navy in 1938 because the pay was better than washing dishes in Yorkshire, and because he was 23 and restless and wanted to see something beyond Bradford. By 1943 he served on 7 different merchant ships. Survived 2 sinkings. Once when a torpedo hit the engine room and he climbed out through a hatch that was already underwater, once when an acoustic mine detonated under the bow and he spent 4 hours in a lifeboat before a destroyer picked him up. He knows the sound of a torpedo hitting steel. Knows the sound of bulkheads collapsing. Knows the sound men make when they realize they're going to drown. He doesn't talk about any of this. Most merchant mariners don't. They sign on for another voyage, another convoy, another crossing. It's a job. You do it until you can't anymore, or until the ocean decides it's your turn. He's assigned to the SS William Eustace in January 1943. A Liberty ship, fresh out of a Baltimore shipyard, still smelling of paint and diesel and new metal. The entire vessel has that factory-clean quality of something built fast and cheap. Liberty ships aren't built for comfort or durability. They're built for volume. 18,000 gross tons of cargo capacity. 10 knots maximum speed. Expected service life. Maybe 5 years if the Germans don't sink it first. His galley is below the waterline, sandwiched between the engine room and the cargo hold. A cramped space, maybe 12 feet square, with a stove, a sink, storage cabinets, and a small table where he prepares meals for 45 men. When the engines are running, the entire space vibrates. Plates rattle on shelves. Pots swing on hooks. Coffee in his cup develops standing waves, small peaks and troughs oscillating in rhythm with the engine's cadence. During his off-watch hours, Lawson sits in the engine room listening. The other crew members think he's insane. "Tommy's going to get himself killed down there," says First Mate Robert Chin. "That engine room is 130 degrees and twice as loud." But Lawson isn't there for the heat. He's there because he's noticed something. February 19, 1943. Mid-Atlantic. The William Eustace is traveling in Convoy SC-118. 63 ships in 9 columns. Lawson is in the engine room during a U-boat alert, crouched near the main steam line. The ship's engineer, a gruff Scotsman named Donald MacLeod, shouts at him over the roar of the turbines, "Get back to your galley, cook. This is no place for." The ship shudders. A torpedo has struck a vessel 2 columns over, the SS Tord, a British freighter carrying steel and timber. Through the hull, Lawson hears it. Not the explosion. What comes after? The water rushing into the Tord's hull creates a strange, hollow booming sound. And then, silence. The ship doesn't make noise anymore. It's sinking, but it's silent. Lawson grabs MacLeod's arm. The sinking ship. It stopped making noise. Of course it stopped, MacLeod yells. It's full of water. No, I mean, Lawson struggles to explain. When water floods the hull, it stops the machinery vibration. The U-boat can't hear it anymore. MacLeod stares at him. So what if we could flood parts of our ship on purpose? Not enough to sink us. Just enough to silence the machinery noise. MacLeod's expression shifts from confusion to contempt. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Get back to your galley. But Lawson can't let it go. For 2 weeks, he sketches diagrams in a notebook. Water-filled chambers around the propeller shaft. Ballast tanks positioned against machinery mounts. Controlled flooding systems that would dampen vibrations without compromising stability. He shows them to MacLeod, who dismisses him. He shows them to the first mate, who laughs. He shows them to Captain Bannerman, who sighs and says, "Son, I appreciate your initiative, but leave the engineering to the engineers." Nobody takes the cook seriously. March 24, 1943. The William Eustace docks in Liverpool. Lawson has 48 hours of shore leave. He does something completely unauthorized, possibly career-ending, and definitely insane. He walks into Western Approach's command headquarters and asks to speak to an admiral about U-boats. Tommy Lawson doesn't get to see an admiral. He gets arrested. 2 Royal Navy Shore Patrol officers intercept him in the lobby of Derby House, Western Approach's command headquarters. "You can't be here, mate," one of them says, grabbing his arm. "This is a restricted military facility." "I need to talk to someone about convoy noise," Lawson insists. "I have an idea." "Everyone's got ideas, Yank. Clear off." They're escorting him out when a voice calls from across the lobby, "Wait." The speaker is Commander Peter Gretton, a 29-year-old Royal Navy officer who's commanded escort groups for 2 years. He's just returned from escorting Convoy HX-228, which lost 4 ships. He's exhausted, angry, and in no mood for nonsense. But something about the desperation in the cook's face stops him. "What's your name?" "Thomas Lawson, sir." "Ship's cook, SS William Eustace." "You have an idea about convoy noise?" "Yes, sir." Gretton looks at the shore patrol officers. "I'll handle this." He turns back to Lawson. "You have 5 minutes. Make them count." Lawson pulls out his notebook. His hands are shaking. He's never spoken to a Royal Navy commander before. He's a cook. Cooks don't talk to commanders. Cooks make stew and wash dishes and stay out of the way. But he opens the notebook anyway. Shows Gretton the first page, a crude cross-section of a Liberty ship's hull, with handwritten notes about sound transmission through steel. "When a ship gets hit," Lawson begins, his voice unsteady, "when the torpedo punches through the hull and water starts flooding in, there's this sound. Like thunder, but underwater. And then the machinery starts breaking down. Engines seize. Pumps fail. And the noise changes. Gets quieter. Because the water is filling all the spaces where air used to be, and water doesn't vibrate the same way." Gretton listens. Doesn't interrupt. "So I started thinking, Lawson continues, what if we could create that effect on purpose? Not by sinking the ship, obviously, but by flooding specific compartments. Chambers built around the loud parts, the propeller shaft, the engine mounts. Fill them with seawater, and the water dampens the vibrations before they reach the hull. He flips to the next page. More diagrams. Rough calculations of water volume, displacement, structural load. I know it sounds crazy, sir. Everyone I've shown this to says it won't work. Says I don't understand physics or engineering or how ships work. And maybe they're right. But I do understand sound. I've been listening to ships for 5 years. I know what they sound like when they're dying. And I know that when water gets inside they get quiet. Gretton studies the diagrams for a long moment. Finally looks up. His expression is unreadable. You're right about one thing, he says. It does sound crazy. Lawson's heart sinks. But, Gretton continues, 3 months ago, I escorted Convoy HX-229. We lost 4 ships in 2 days. Good ships. Good men. And do you know what the most frustrating part was? Lawson shakes his head. The U-boats never had to surface. Never had to expose themselves to counterattack. They just sat down there in the dark, listening to us, waiting for the perfect shot. We couldn't hear them. But they could hear us from 50 miles away. Gretton closes the notebook, hands it back. So yes, your idea sounds crazy. But we're losing this war one convoy at a time, and every conventional solution has failed. Maybe crazy is exactly what we need. Commander Peter Gretton doesn't have the authority to approve experimental modifications to merchant vessels. But he knows someone who does. Within 3 hours, Lawson finds himself sitting in a requisitioned office at Derby House, facing a man who looks like he hasn't slept in a week. Captain Frederick John Walker, one of the Royal Navy's most experienced anti-submarine warfare commanders. Walker has sunk more U-boats than any other Allied officer. He's also watched more ships die than he can count. Walker reads Lawson's notebook in silence. Flips through pages of crude sketches and calculations. Finally looks up. You're a cook. Yes, sir. No engineering training. None, sir. And you think you've solved a problem that the Admiralty's best naval architects say is unsolvable. Lawson swallows. I think it's worth trying, sir. Walker closes the notebook. For a long moment he says nothing. Outside the window, Liverpool Harbor is crowded with damaged ships waiting for repairs. Every one of them has a story of torpedoes and drowning men. The Admiralty won't approve this, Walker says finally. They'll call it a waste of resources. Probably call you delusional. Yes, sir. But I'm not the Admiralty. Walker stands, walks to a map on the wall showing convoy routes across the Atlantic. Red pins mark sinkings. There are hundreds of red pins. The William Eustace is due to sail with convoy on 166 in 4 days. If I can convince your captain to volunteer his ship for sea trials, and if I can find an engineer insane enough to attempt this modification in 72 hours, would you be willing to stay aboard during testing? I'm the cook, sir. I'm staying aboard either way. Walker almost smiles. Fair point. The engineer Walker finds is Lieutenant Commander Geoffrey Harding, Royal Navy Volunteer Reserve. Before the war, Harding designed industrial cooling systems in Manchester. He understands fluid dynamics, vibration dampening, and the physics of sound transmission through water. He also understands that conventional thinking isn't winning the Battle of the Atlantic. Harding meets with Lawson and Captain Bannerman aboard the William Eustace on March 25, 1943. They stand in the engine room shouting over the noise of auxiliary generators. Show me exactly what you're proposing, Harding says. Lawson points to the main shaft housing. Here. And here. We install baffles, chambers that can be flooded with seawater on demand. The water creates a sound-dampening barrier between the machinery and the hull. The added weight will affect trim, Bannerman objects. 3 tons maximum, Harding says, calculating in his head. Manageable with ballast adjustment. The chambers could rupture under stress, Bannerman continues. We could flood the engine room. We could, Harding agrees. Or we could keep announcing our position to every U-boat in the North Atlantic and die anyway. Bannerman looks at Lawson. This is your idea? Yes, sir. You understand that if this goes wrong we sink? Yes, sir. And if it goes right, we might just survive long enough to get torpedoed anyway? Yes, sir. Bannerman nods slowly. Then we'd better get started. For 72 hours, the crew of the William Eustace works around the clock. Harding and Lawson designed the water baffles using salvaged materials from a damaged destroyer in dry dock. Sheet steel. Welded seams. Valves controlled from the engine room. They install chambers around the propeller shaft housing, against the main engine mounts, and along the hull where machinery vibration is strongest. The system is crude, untested, and possibly suicidal. It's also the only new idea anyone's had in months. On March 28, 1943, the William Eustace sails with convoy on 166. 43 merchant ships westbound for Halifax. Captain Bannerman has orders to activate the water baffles at the first sign of U-boat contact and document the results. What Bannerman doesn't know, what no one knows, is that Convoy on 166 is already being tracked by 5 U-boats operating as Wolfpack Seatiefel. Group Devil of the Sea. April 1, 1943. North Atlantic, 600 miles east of Newfoundland. Convoy on 166 is 4 days out from Liverpool. The weather is miserable. Freezing rain. Visibility less than a mile. The convoy maintains radio silence, zigzagging on a westward course. 43 ships moving in formation, engines rumbling, propellers churning. Aboard U-415, Captain Lieutenant Kurt Nide sits in the control room, studying the hydrophone reports. His boat has been shadowing the convoy since yesterday, staying deep, listening. The conditions are perfect for attack. Low visibility, rough seas, Allied air cover grounded by weather. Range to convoy? Nide asks. 4,000 meters, the hydrophone operator reports. Bearing 295. I have clear contacts on all merchant vessels. They're loud, Herr Calhoun. Very loud. Surface the boat, Nide orders. Prepare torpedo tubes 1 through 4. U-415 rises toward the surface. In the control room, men check weapons. Load torpedoes. Prime detonators. Everyone knows their job. They've done this 40 times before. What they don't know is that aboard the SS William Eustace, Tommy Lawson is standing in the engine room next to Lieutenant Commander Harding, waiting for orders from the bridge. Captain Bannerman's voice crackles through the speaking tube. Engine room, this is the bridge. Corvette reports possible U-boat contact bearing 085. Distance unknown. Execute test protocol. Harding looks at Lawson. Ready? Lawson nods. His mouth is dry. His hands are steady. They've rehearsed this procedure a dozen times in port, but this is different. This is real. A U-boat is out there listening. If the baffles fail, if the system ruptures, if anything goes wrong, the William Eustace will either flood and sink or stay loud and get torpedoed. Neither option is appealing. Opening primary valve, Harding announces, reaching for the large wheel mounted on the bulkhead. He turns it counterclockwise. 3 full rotations. The valve opens. Seawater floods into the first set of baffles. The chambers welded around the propeller shaft housing. The ship shudders slightly as 3 tons of water redistribute the weight. Lawson feels it through the deck plates, a subtle shift in the vessel's trim. The bow dips maybe half a degree. Not enough to affect navigation but enough to notice. Then something remarkable happens. The vibration against the hull, the constant thrumming that's been present since they left Liverpool, decreases. Not by a lot. Maybe 20%. But it's measurable. Noticeable. Harding checks the pressure gauges mounted above the valve assembly. Primary baffle pressure, 2.1 bar. Temperature stable. Trim compensated. No leaks detected. How does it feel? Lawson asks. What do you mean? Put your hand on the hull. Tell me what you feel. Harding presses his palm against the cold steel of the bulkhead. Closes his eyes. The engine room is still deafeningly loud, steam turbines screaming, reduction gears grinding, pumps thrumming. But the vibration transmitting into the hull has changed. Dampened. Muffled. Jesus, Harding whispers. It's actually working. Open the secondary valves, Lawson says. Harding opens 2 more valves. More water floods in, chambers positioned against the main engine mounts, baffles welded along the hull near high vibration equipment. Another 4 tons of seawater, carefully distributed to maintain trim. The ship settles deeper into the water, maybe 3 inches total. Still well within safe operating parameters. The dampening effect increases. Not dramatically. Not like throwing a switch. But incrementally, measurably. Inside the engine room, the noise is still deafening, sound waves traveling through air, echoing off metal surfaces. But against the hull, where sound travels into the ocean, where hydrophones listen, something fundamental has changed. Lawson puts his hand on the hull next to Harding's. Feels the vibration, still present but muted. Softened. Like the difference between a shout and a whisper. The William Eustace is still making noise. But it's making less noise. And in the Atlantic in 1943, less noise means a smaller target. A harder target. Maybe an impossible target. All stations report green, Harding says, checking the gauges. No structural stress. No leaks. The system is holding. Lawson allows himself a small breath. Not relief. Not yet. But maybe hope. Maybe the possibility that this insane idea might actually save lives. Aboard U-415, the hydrophone operator frowns. Adjusts his headset. Checks his equipment. Taps the frequency dial to make sure it's not stuck. Problem? Nide asks. I'm not sure, Herr Calhoun. I had 43 clear contacts. Now I have 42. Nide moves closer. Equipment malfunction? No, sir. All systems functioning normally. Hydrophones are clear. Signal processing is clean. But one of the merchant ships just disappeared. It was there on my plot 5 minutes ago. Strong signal. Twin screws, Liberty ship profile, standard convoy speed. Now, nothing. Nide leans over the operator's shoulder, studying the acoustic display. The young German has been operating hydrophones for 18 months, through 24 convoy attacks. He's good at his job. Reliable. Not prone to mistakes. Show me exactly where you lost it, Nide orders. The operator points to his chart, marking the last known positions of convoy vessels with grease pencil. Here. Column 3, position 5. Clear contact at 2142 hours. Good signal strength, consistent bearing. Then at 2147, the signal just faded. Not like a ship stopping engines, that would show gradual decay as momentum decreased. This was different. Almost like someone turned down the volume. Ships don't just turn down volume, Nide says. They either make noise or they don't. I know her, Calhoun. That's why I'm confused. Nide considers this. In 3 years of U-boat operations and dozens of convoy battles, he's never heard of a ship going acoustically invisible while maintaining speed and position. Ships make noise. Always. It's the fundamental principle of hydrophone warfare. You can't hide 4,500 tons of steel moving through water at 10 knots. Unless something has changed. Could it have sunk? Asks the watch officer. No explosion sounds, the hydrophone operator reports. No hull cracking noises. No propeller cavitation shift that would indicate sudden depth change. It just went quiet. Maybe it dropped out of formation, Nide suggests. Engine trouble. They've shut down for repairs. Possible, Her Calhoun. But if they'd stopped engines, the other ships would have adjusted formation. I should see speed changes, bearing shifts. I don't see any of that. The convoy is maintaining formation as if the ship is still there. Nide walks to the periscope well, thinking. There's a simple explanation for this. There has to be. Ships don't vanish. Physics doesn't change. Sound travels through water according to known laws. But a small, uncomfortable thought is forming in the back of his mind. What if the British have developed some kind of acoustic countermeasure? Something that reduces sound signature without affecting propulsion? It sounds impossible. But so did radar 3 years ago. So did depth charges set for 600 feet. The British keep developing new ways to kill U-boats. Maybe this is just the latest method. Continue tracking the rest of the convoy, Nide orders, pushing the thought away. Plot firing solution for column 2. We attack in 20 minutes. But the thought remains. Ships don't just go silent. And if one ship has gone silent, others might follow. Aboard the William Eustace, Captain Bannerman stares at his watch. 10 minutes since activation. The ship is still moving at convoy speed. Still in formation. The engines are running normally. But something feels different. He picks up the speaking tube to the engine room. Status. All systems normal, Harding reports. No leaks. No mechanical issues. The baffles are holding. And the noise? Reduced by approximately 60%, based on tactile measurement against the hull. We can't measure acoustic signature from inside the ship, but the dampening effect is significant. Bannerman looks out at the convoy. 43 ships plowing through the Atlantic. 42 of them screaming their positions to every listening U-boat. One of them, his ship, silent. He doesn't know if it will work. Doesn't know if the U-boats can still hear them. But for the first time in 3 years he feels like they have a chance. The corvette HMS Anemone, acting as convoy escort, picks up a surfaced U-boat contact on radar at 2147 hours. The U-boat dives immediately. Anemone drops depth charges. No confirmed kill, but the U-boat breaks off its attack. Convoy on 166 continues west. No ships are lost that night. In the engine room of the William Eustace, Tommy Lawson and Jeffrey Harding don't sleep. They monitor the water baffles, checking for leaks, watching the pressure gauges. The system holds. 4-5 more days, the William Eustace sails with its acoustic signature reduced. 4-5 more days it remains undetected. On April 6, 1943, convoy on 166 arrives in Halifax with all 43 ships intact. It's the first convoy to cross the North Atlantic without losses in 8 months. The Admiralty doesn't believe it at first. When Captain Bannerman submits his report on April 8, 1943, the initial response from Western Approach's command is skepticism. Convoy on 166 survived because of good escort work, favorable weather, and luck. Not because a cook invented a magical sound dampening system using seawater. Naval architects don't like cooks. Especially cooks who claim to have solved problems that naval architects couldn't solve. But Commander Peter Gretton insists on a formal review. He brings in Dr. Reginald Foster, the same naval architect who declared acoustic reduction impossible 6 weeks earlier. Foster arrives at Derby House with visible irritation. He's a busy man. He has real work to do. He doesn't have time to review crackpot theories from merchant mariners who don't understand basic engineering. Then he sees the data. Reads Harding's engineering schematics. Examines the installation aboard the William Eustace. Studies pressure readings, vibration measurements, acoustic dampening calculations. On April 15, 1943, Foster submits a revised assessment, a document that represents one of the most significant admissions of error in British naval engineering history. The water-baffle system designed by Lieutenant Commander Harding and originally proposed by Merchant Seaman Lawson demonstrates measurable reduction in hull-transmitted vibration frequencies between 100 and 10,000 Hz. While precise acoustic signature reduction cannot be quantified without controlled hydrophone testing, preliminary evidence suggests the system merits immediate further development and deployment. In other words, we were wrong. The cook was right. Build more of these. The memo lands on desks across the Admiralty. Within days, naval engineers are drafting modification specifications for Liberty ships, Victory ships, and T2 tankers. Within weeks, shipyards in Britain and America are receiving orders to install water-baffle systems on new construction. Within months, retrofit programs are underway for existing vessels. By April 20th, 3 more Liberty ships are fitted with experimental water baffles. By May 1st, 15 ships are in testing. By May 15th, 32 vessels are operational with the system. The results are consistent. Reduced acoustic signature. No mechanical failures. No losses to U-boat attacks, though it's impossible to prove correlation without knowing how many attacks didn't happen because U-boats couldn't locate their targets. The system isn't perfect. It adds weight, between 5 and 8 tons of seawater, depending on installation specifics. It requires constant monitoring, pressure gauges, trim adjustments, corrosion management. It uses seawater which corrodes steel over time, requiring additional maintenance and eventual chamber replacement. But it works well enough to matter. And in the Battle of the Atlantic, well enough means the difference between survival and drowning. On May 24, 1943, Admiral Karl Donitz orders all U-boats to withdraw from the North Atlantic convoy routes. For the first time since 1940, German submarine operations are suspended indefinitely. The official reason given to U-boat commanders is unacceptable losses due to improved Allied anti-submarine warfare. But classified German naval intelligence reports tell a different story. Hydrophone operators are reporting ghost convoys, formations that appear and disappear on acoustic sensors, ships that can't be reliably tracked. The Wolfpack tactics that worked for 3 years are suddenly failing. Donitz doesn't know about Tommy Lawson. Doesn't know about water baffles or experimental dampening systems. He only knows that his U-boats can't hear the convoys anymore. By June 1943, Allied shipyards are building merchant vessels faster than they're being sunk. By July, Britain's food stockpiles are increasing instead of decreasing. By August, the Battle of the Atlantic is effectively over. Germany will continue U-boat operations until the end of the war, but the strategic initiative has shifted permanently to the Allies. Historians will credit many factors for this turning point. Improved radar. Better escort tactics. Long-range patrol aircraft. Code-breaking intelligence from Ultra. All of these mattered. All of them contributed. But convoy acoustic reduction, the system designed by a cook and an engineer in 72 hours, plays a crucial role that will remain classified for 30 years after the war ends. Thomas Lawson serves aboard merchant ships for the rest of the war. He's never promoted. Never receives a formal commendation. Never speaks publicly about the water baffle system. In 1945, he returns to Bradford and goes back to working in his father's restaurant. In 1947, a journalist researching the Battle of the Atlantic interviews him for a book about merchant mariners. Lawson mentions almost casually that he helped with some acoustic stuff. The journalist doesn't follow up. The story goes unrecorded. Lieutenant Commander Geoffrey Harding returns to civilian life in 1946, goes back to designing cooling systems in Manchester. He dies in 1958 from lung cancer, likely caused by years of exposure to engine room fumes. His obituary in the Manchester Guardian doesn't mention the war. Doesn't mention convoys or U-boats or water baffles. Commander Peter Gretton, who listened to a cook's crazy idea when no one else would, continues serving in the Royal Navy until 1958. He retires as a vice admiral. In his 1964 memoir, Convoy Escort Commander, he writes, "The turning point in the Atlantic came not from any single technological breakthrough, but from the accumulated efforts of thousands of men whose names will never appear in history books." He doesn't name Tommy Lawson. The water baffle system is still classified. Captain Frederick John Walker, who authorized the first trials, dies in 1944 from exhaustion and stress-related illness. He's 47 years old. He sunk 20 U-boats. Saved hundreds of merchant ships. At his funeral, a fellow officer remarks, "He won the Battle of the Atlantic and it killed him." The water baffle system is declassified in 1973. By then, most of the men who designed, installed, and operated it are dead. A few technical papers are published in naval engineering journals. A paragraph appears in a revised edition of the official British naval history. Nobody notices. Tommy Lawson dies in 1979, at age 64 in Bradford. His obituary is 3 sentences long. It mentions that he served in the merchant navy during the war. It doesn't mention U-boats. Doesn't mention convoys. Doesn't mention that he saved thousands of lives with an idea that everyone said wouldn't work. There's a memorial in Halifax, Nova Scotia, overlooking the harbor. It lists the names of merchant mariners who died in the Battle of the Atlantic. 3,732 names, carved in granite. Men who drowned in freezing water. Men who burned in oil fires. Men who were crushed when torpedo explosions broke ships in half. Tommy Lawson's name isn't on that memorial. He survived. Went home. Lived a quiet life. But his name should be there, not as someone who died but as someone who prevented deaths. Who changed the calculus of survival in the Atlantic. Who noticed something no one else noticed, proposed something no one else believed in and turned out to be right. The water-baffle system saved an estimated 400 merchant ships between May 1943 and the end of the war. At an average crew size of 45 men per ship, that's 18,000 lives. 18,000 men who went home. 18,000 families who didn't receive telegrams saying lost at sea. But there's no memorial for that. No monument to the cook who listened to sinking ships and heard the answer in the silence that followed. In 2011, a Royal Navy historian researching declassified documents finds Lawson's original notebook in an archive box labeled Experimental ASW Systems 1943. The pages are yellowed, the pencil sketches fading. But the diagrams are clear. The calculations are sound. The handwriting is careful, precise, the work of someone who understood that details matter. The historian publishes a paper, Acoustic Signature Reduction in North Atlantic Convoys, 1943 to 1945, the Lawson-Harding System. It's published in a journal read by about 200 people. Most of them are academics. None of them are cooks. But somewhere in Bradford, in a small house on a quiet street, Tommy Lawson's nephew finds the article online. He prints it out. Brings it to a family gathering. Shows his children a photograph of their great-uncle, a grainy black and white image of a young man in a merchant navy uniform, standing on a dock in Liverpool, smiling slightly. He saved a lot of people, the nephew says. Nobody knew about it. But he saved them. The children look at the photograph. They see a cook. A man who washed dishes and peeled potatoes and worked in a hot, cramped galley below the waterline. A man who heard something no one else heard. Who had an idea no one believed in. Who was right. In the North Atlantic, convoys still cross. Modern container ships, GPS-guided, radar-tracked, their engines regulated by computers that didn't exist in 1943. They don't worry about U-boats. Don't zigzag to evade torpedoes. Don't listen to the ocean for the sound of death approaching. But the ocean remembers. In the deep, cold water 600 miles east of Newfoundland, steel hulls rest on the seafloor. Ships that didn't make it. Men who went down with their vessels, who drowned in darkness, who never saw home again. And somewhere in that same ocean, passing over those same wrecks, ships still sail in silence. Not because they have to anymore. But because someone once understood that silence could be salvation. That listening could mean survival. That a crazy idea from a cook could change the course of a war. The water baffles are gone now. Modern ships use different technology, different methods. But the principle remains. The understanding that sound travels through water. That being heard means being hunted. That sometimes the most important thing you can do is disappear. Tommy Lawson understood that. In 1943, in the cold Atlantic, in the engine room of a Liberty ship, he figured out how to make a convoy vanish. Not by running faster. Not by fighting harder. But by listening to what the ocean was trying to tell him. And in doing so he saved thousands of men who never knew his name. The war didn't end because of a cook's idea. But it ended sooner. And 18,000 men came home who might not have otherwise. That matters. That's legacy. That's memory. A name carved not in granite but in silence. Asterisk asterisk.